I think the other thing that you guys have covered, but maybe not explicitly as well, and I want to bring to the forefront here is the idea of diversification and how the efficient frontier changes in the various different economic regimes. Maybe I can just show my screen here for a second, because I think we haven't looked at this graphic in a long time. So you can see in these efficient frontiers, you have the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and then the entire period. And the interesting thing is, in that period where Adam highlights this idea of stagflation, which is the 70s, you can see that green line. The efficient frontier is, in fact, just simply a straight line. And it's a straight line because there is no benefit of diversity in stocks and bonds. And that's really the last decade where that happened. Another interesting one that maybe harkens back is the red efficient frontier of the 2000s, where it's actually inverted, and bonds are the higher risk adjusted return asset and equities are at the lower right. And that was a function of excess value. We can drop that, I think, now, come back to do I stop
excess
there?
valuations, you mean, coming off the 2000 top?
Yeah. And so when you think about the what you outline, Adam, as being the potential for a little bit more inflationary pressures as we go forward over the next decade, and how that has implications for rates, and looking at high equity valuations, this is very much like the late 1960s, the Nifty 50, and you get into a period where you have negative real returns for both stocks and bonds, and they're correlated. Like, the big thing to me is, and they are correlated. Like the 2000s, well, yeah, okay, equities were pretty crummy, but stocks and bonds were not correlated. They were very uncorrelated. And thus, if you held a portfolio of both and rebalanced, you actually fared okay. That's not what happens in the 70s.
Yeah. And I think, the issue is clear of having those two asset classes. We see the blind spots, but those who have seen the blind spots in the last 10 years and done something about it have struggled, right?
They've suffered. They've been
because of what
punished.
Corey mentioned, right? What have you done? You grabbed the two best performing asset classes, reduced your allocation to them to make space for alternative strategies. Some of them may have been CTAs that have had, comparative to their previous 20 years, where they were doing mid to high double digits. In the last decade, they've done low single digits, right? So if you're dragging down 30% of your portfolio to add to these CTAs or managed futures managers that have exposure to commodities because you see the writing on the wall, you've gotten fired over and over again. And that's one of the things that we address in the paper.
You're picking on managed futures. I mean, I think you've got to expand that to basically every
liquid alternative,
value manager,
global equity,
alternative, global
every
macro,
factor strategy, every other jurisdiction, every other asset class has suffered relative to U.S. equities and treasuries and credit.
So